not quite the middle of the book, and it's the place where Deanie is trying to communicate with her friend Maddie, whom she's left behind in Maryland. And Deanie and her family are in India in a fictional town called Swapnagiri, which means Dream Mountain. So that's really all you need to know. It's all too complicated for a phone call, especially when Maddie is now going on about how clever Deanie is. And then she goes on to something else, something long and convoluted about dreams coming true. An email. Deanie decides she'll have to tell Maddie about Priya in an email. She'd better tell her it's not going that smoothly so far, even if Dolly is here. That itself seems such an impossible thing that Deanie wonders, was Viren even right about that? Did he make a mistake? Or worse, much worse, did Deanie imagine it all? She was pretty tired and jet-lagged at the time. Deanie tries to herd all these thoughts into words that will make sense, but Maddie is still talking. Don't forget to get her autograph for me, okay? Deanie has heard of hearts sinking. She has always thought it was an odd thing for a heart to do, but now she thinks she knows what that means. You promised, Maddie says. Okay, says Deanie. I mean, yes, Maddie, yes. And she hangs up, but only after Maddie has blown kisses to her over the phone and told her to remember that half those kisses were for Dolly and Deanie should be sure to pass them on. Definitely, at this very moment, Deanie's heart is doing that sinking thing.
Oh, Uma, that's wonderful. I love the line, Deanie has heard of heart sinking. And she always thought it was an odd thing for a heart to do. What a wonderful, wonderful sentence. And the whole book is like that. You know, the language of it is just spot on, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a really peculiar thing because this book took a long time to fall into place. And the thing that made it fall into place was that narrative voice in the end. I tried it in very many different ways. It was sort of a straight-on family story at one point, and it wasn't working. It was sort of trying to be a mystery at one point, and that wasn't working. But the moment that omniscient voice that can go anywhere in the story fell into place, that's when it really started to come together for me.
Well, clearly the dominant voice in the novel is Denie's, and she's our hero, she's our our main character. But you're so right about that omniscient voice. It carries. It's almost like a chorus in a way.
Right.
With the various, we get to see through the eyes of all of the players, and in that way, it becomes very much like a screenplay. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that Deanie is creating her own screenplay, and eventually becomes like the player, the producer, the director, and eventually the main character, actually. I mean, that's the grand plan, isn't it? The screenplay.
Yes, and Deanie, of course, is in love with the movies, and so she visualizes everything, life, the universe, and everything in terms of a screenplay, because that is just who she is. But what happens is really not that different from what happens when children write. And when I used to write as a child, sometimes I would start off in third person, and then about a couple pages into the process, it would be I in the story, and suddenly I would realize that I was putting myself into the story, and I think a lot of young writers do that. And in a way, that's what Deanie's doing. She's writing herself into her own story.
It's wonderful, and I love there's a point when it's about maybe 2/3 of the way through the book when she makes a major discovery that she says something like, this plotting thing is becoming more and more complicated, and she says something like, as soon as I uncover one problem to solve, the uncovering shows me that there are many more problems to solve, and it's like a spinning wheel. It keeps going and going.
And she figures this out when of course they've got the hood of the car open, and the mechanic is trying to figure out where this strange noise is coming from. And at that point, it occurs to her that you go looking for one problem, and then you find another, and then you find another, and then you find another. Which, oh my gosh, I could certainly relate to that in terms of plotting. But it's also true about life.
And pretty soon it starts spinning out of your control,
completely
right?
out of control, yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the main objects of Denie's affection, of course, is Dolly Singh, the hero of so many Bollywood films, the fictional hero, your fictional hero, and she's not only this wonderful screen star, but she's in a way a national symbol of India. And so when Denny gets to go, or I shouldn't say she gets to go, but when she goes to India, she becomes like the super object of her, not desire, that's not the right word, but she's looking for Dolly. And at one point, it's clear that Dolly is missing, and all of the fan magazines are saying, you know, where is Dolly? Where is Dolly? And so there's this aspect of missing in the story, and but it's bigger than that. Do you want to talk about missing? And there's a word for it.
The word is gayab, which means, you know, vanished. Or disappeared, really, and then it's juxtaposed with a couple of other words which are much lighter in tone, but gayab is pretty intense, and it's a Hindi Urdu word. But Deeni is so focused on Dolly that when she, even from the outset, even when the great big news about the move is dropped on her, she moves the focus so quickly to Dolly that she really doesn't have time to think about what it is it's actually missing. And of course there's a whole other piece of her life that is going to be missing when she moves, and that begins, the more she looks for Dolly, the more her own life begins to swim into focus for her. So that's really the shift in the story, and that's the way the story moves. Is as the setting, as she creeps into the setting and begins to become part of that setting, her life and what she left behind, and her friendships, and how to maintain relationships across continents, these are the things that begin to then creep into her story, but she doesn't realize it. So the reader actually knows quite a bit more than Deeni does almost all the way through the book.
And I think what gives the book its magic, and it feels very magical to me, the book does, is that it's this very quick-paced story. You know, it's short chapters, it goes from point of view to point of view, and it feels like you're really, really clipping along. And a lot of that has to do with the language. You use a lot of repetition, especially I love look, listen.
Oh yeah, which really comes directly from the Hindi, which is, you know, suno suno, dekho dekho, which is what comes from the Dolly song. But yeah, a lot of that is from the language.
Yeah, but despite the fast pace of it and the sense of joy, I think there is a stream of joy that is running through it because of the pace. But over and over, there's a single word that keeps coming up, and that word is heartbreak.
Oh, that's amazing that you picked that up, because that it flashes by fairly quickly. And of course, it's ostensibly it's Dolly's heartbreak, but
and the heartbreak of her fans. You know, in the movie magazines, they're all going. There's conjecture that her heart has been broken, and of course the fans' hearts have been broken. But so the word comes up, it bubbles up, and it's almost like a red light. You see it, but then you don't. You know?
Right, and then it's gone. And it seems on the surface as if it's all about Dolly and the movies and her love life and where she is, and everybody's trying to find her. But just like Deeni's creeping into her own story, the emotional through line is really Deeni's and her friend Maddie, whom she's left behind and is trying desperately to stay connected with. And so then there's the question of really whose heart is it that we're talking about? And I think that's one of the reasons that the word heartbreak came up so often for me, is it was just a little splash in the water.
It's not at all heavy-handed, but there's this stream running underneath the surface of the water that allows us to see the heartbreak that is really occurring. And then also you talked about connectivity, because one of the challenges for Deeni is maintaining a friendship with her friend who's halfway around the world in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And of course, as part of that connectivity is the wonderful post office and the role the post office plays. So would you talk about the Indian Postal Service?
I just love the post office. That part of the story came into play for me when I took a picture not too far from a place very much like the place that this takes place in Swapnagiri. I took this picture of a red mailbox, a post box in India, and they're painted red, and they're sort of like little pillars. They look a bit like oversized fire hydrants. And it was just such a strong image, and this notion of this little box standing, on a hillside somewhere outside this little post office, and letters came and went through it. And so when Dini wrote her letter to Dolly, there was just something that made me follow that letter instead of doing the traditional thing and staying with the character, as normally one would do in writing a piece of fiction. I instead chose to follow the letter, and the moment I did that, there were just all kinds of amazing magical things that opened up. For one thing, there were all these crazy adult characters who came into play. There was the postman, the youngest postman in Mumbai post office, who has his own life, and he's got a mother, and he's going to get married, and all these things are going to happen to him, and he's yeah. So part of it is just where that letter goes and who takes it, and how.
And all tied in with that is a wonderful word, and that word would be kismet.
Oh yes, that word.
It's such a sweet word, and you hardly ever hear it anymore. It's kind of an old-fashioned word, but you told me that it's actually a Hindi word.
It's a Hindi and an Urdu word, and Hindi Urdu are of course parallel languages, and it means loosely fate or destiny or some combination thereof. And it's big in Bollywood films. I mean, kismet is huge in Bollywood films, and was from way before they were ever called Bollywood. There was always this notion of your destiny hanging over your head, or you chase off into the sunset to meet it, and there's always romance involved, and sometimes there's great acts of daring do, but it's always there. And so because coincidence, or the thing that we'd call coincidence, does play a role in the story, it needed to have that overlay of kismet, something bigger than just, it just happened to happen.
Well, what I think is special about the whole notion of kismet, as far as Dini is concerned, is that she seems to create her own kismet by her willingness to write her own screenplay.
And to take risks. I mean, I think she really sticks her neck out in a lot of situations where she's feeling pretty desperate, but she figures if she's not going to do something, no one else is. So, bingo, there she is out there sticking her neck out. And that, of course, creates its own chain of reactions. Yeah.
Well, Uma, would you hold the book up so we can show everybody? There it is for its fans. So Uma.
Kathi, thank you.
You betcha. Signing off.